It is August 9th, 1965. Lee Kuan Yew is weeping on live national television because he has just been granted his own independent country. This independence was a survival crisis. Malaysia had just expelled Singapore, leaving the island isolated without farmland, natural resources, or an army. Half of its water and 90% of its food were imported from across the causeway. Lee now led a territory that looked less like a nation and more like a failed state waiting to collapse. In 1965, 75% of families lived in shacks or squatter huts without running water. Ethnic riots between Malay and Chinese residents frequently left bodies in the gutters. This chart shows the result of the following 5 decades. Singapore's GDP per capita currently reaches $90,000, surpassing the United States at $85,000, and far outstripping neighbors like Malaysia at $12,000 and Indonesia at $5,000. Executing history's greatest geopolitical comeback required a total re-engineering of the country, driven by the personal traumas of its architect. In 1942, Lee watched the British Empire collapse to the Japanese army in just 70 days. The shock of this sudden imperial surrender destroyed his belief in external protection. During the Japanese occupation, Lee narrowly escaped the Sukching massacres, where tens of thousands of Chinese men were executed. He survived because a guard allowed him to return home to fetch his clothes, while others were sent to the killing fields. These experiences hardened into a central philosophy: never depend on anyone, never trust chance, and always stand on your own. This extreme self-reliance became the psychological blueprint for the new nation. By 1965, Singapore faced immediate existential threats from larger hostile neighbors. Indonesia had launched a campaign of violence against the region, which included bombing a civilian building in the heart of Singapore. Lee prioritized survival over national pride. He personally flew to Jakarta to scatter flowers at the very Marines who had bombed his country. It was a humiliating gesture, but it stabilized relations with a regional giant. Behind the diplomacy, he secretly built an army. He brought in Israeli military advisors to develop a defense doctrine and implement mandatory national service, training a civilian population into a disciplined military force. By 1967, Lee helped found ASEAN to ensure regional cooperation. The secret military buildup and the public diplomacy shared one goal: ensuring Singapore would never be physically vulnerable to outsiders again. To attract foreign capital to a resource-poor island, Lee focused on absolute stability. He kept taxes low, eliminated riots, and enforced a level of cleanliness and order designed to make the city irresistible to international companies. He used the Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau to enforce strict anti-corruption laws. When his own Minister for National Development was caught taking bribes, Lee refused to intervene. The minister took his own life before standing trial. This diagram illustrates the Central Provident Fund, or CPF. Lee required workers to deposit 20% of their wages into this state-controlled pool. While framed as a retirement fund, it functioned as a national capital pool to finance growth. The government deployed this to replace slums with high-rise public housing, giving families a stake. Funded by citizens themselves, Lee strictly refused to provide welfare handouts or subsidies. The result was a system where citizens funded their own national development, overseen by an apparatus that punished any deviation from the plan. Lee viewed ethnic conflict between Chinese, Malay, and Indian groups as the primary internal threat. He decided to intervene in private lives to prevent further violence. He enforced housing quotas to ensure different races lived side by side, and mandated English as the common language in schools to unify the workforce. Order was maintained through draconian micromanagement. Drug traffickers faced the gallows, while minor infractions like spitting or littering carried heavy fines. Even chewing gum was banned to protect public infrastructure. Through these laws, Lee manufactured a highly trained, compliant workforce, tailored to the needs of global industry. This social engineering produced world-class infrastructure. Changi Airport and the Port of Singapore became global hubs, attracting the technology and finance sectors of the West. The model was so effective that China's Deng Xiaoping studied the island in 1978, using Singapore as a template to open the world's most populous nation to global markets. This economic success required the sacrifice of political freedom. The press remains tightly controlled, and political opponents have faced bankruptcy or detention without trial. Lee Kuan Yew's proposition was clear. He restricted individual liberties, and in return, he provided safety, wealth, and national survival. At his funeral in 2015, 2 million people lined the streets in the rain. They stood for hours to mourn a leader who had traded their freedom for their security.